At this point, you should be able to add very basic objects such as cubes or spheres or monkey heads and move them around and change their size and rotate them, doing very basic things. This is what you can do in what we call object mode. You always change the entire object in its entirety. You cannot change a cube into a monkey or into something that you want, like a tree or a guy or a football or whatever you want to model. If you want to edit the shape of your models, you want to go into what we call edit mode, and in edit mode you can actually see what the cube is made of. So make sure you select a mesh object, not the camera. This is a camera. You can't select that and go into edit mode and change it into something else, but all meshes can. Now this is the cube and everything is selected. Just like in object mode, you can go back and forth with tab, by the way. What is orange is selected. If I am in edit mode, I can select, for instance, a point, and the point is highlighted. So the cube is made of points at the corners with edges between them, and between four edges is a polygon or face. Now they used to be called faces, nowadays they're called polygons in Blender. I will probably use both names. You can select one of these points, and just like before in the object tools, now there are mesh tools. I can translate a point and change the shape of my model. I can't, however, rotate a point. Well, it says it's rotating at the left bottom corner, but because it's one point, it doesn't really matter. If I select multiple points, however, I can rotate them around each other. In this case, in edit mode, rotating and scaling actually moves the points. So all we are doing is translating points, but because we take multiple, we can translate them in certain ways relative to each other. So I can scale this polygon up, which just moves the 4 points. It's the same as if you're moving the 4 points away from each other. This is ultra basic editing, except of course a cube is but a cube. There are only 6 sides to it and only 8 points. So it's pretty much impossible to make that into a nicely more complicated shape. To do that, we need to add points to our cube. The functions that let you add points to a model can be found on the left in the Mesh Tools menu. You can see there is extrude region, extrude individual, subdivide. All of these add points to your mesh in different ways. In this case, I would like to try to use the shortcut keys on my keyboard, and I want to select a face to show you what extrude does. I will hit E on my keyboard. I just remember what it is, and I can extrude. You can see it drags a shape out of my selection. And here's a little tip. I can drag it smoothly, but if I hold down Control, I can do it in increments. So I can E for extrude and drag it out in increments. That works quite nicely. I'll do it again. So you select a face, you can do multiple faces as well, and extrude. Now, you don't have to keep them in the shape of a block. I can still go select individual points and move them around. But if you have enough, you can extrude. What you don't want to do is extrude a single point that will give you a floating point somewhere in mid-air. That's not printable. It is not what we call manifold. It doesn't make a neat shape. So I will delete that point. Deleting is something you try not to do too much when you're editing in this way. By the way, this technique I'm using is called box modeling, because we're starting from a box and adding more and more points to it. So what we can do now is move points around with the same methods we used to move entire objects and extrude shapes out of it. That works quite nicely. We go from the side. I'll make this a little more narrow. That way we can extrude a shape. This is a nice way to add models, but you always make your shape bigger. If you want to add more detail inside what you already have, for instance, if I want to cut this in half, adding points in the middle of this edge, what you use is loop, cut and slide. I'll click on it and then you hover over the edge you want to cut and it will cut all the way around the model. So I will cut and then say where I can cut wherever I want. In this case, I'd like the exact middle, so I'll type 0 and hit enter. That always cuts in the middle bit. The one just above that I skipped on purpose. I will select everything and hit subdivide and you will see what it does. It adds points everywhere, completely no, it's not random, but it just adds them everywhere, which makes your model more and more detailed, which can be nice, but it gives you detail also in places where you maybe don't need it, so it lacks control. And if you do it to a single edge, I can subdivide, it adds a point in the middle of that edge. That seems very nice, but it means that the shape next to the edge is no longer a quad. It isn't a square. This is a square, right? This is something with 5 points attached to it. This point is also part of that face. And you really don't want that. The reason you don't want that is that loop, cut and slide, for instance, no longer works here. You see it goes all the way around until here and it doesn't want to cut this front face anymore. Features like loop, cut and slide only work if your model is made out of squares. Squares are really, really nice. The reason being that if you come to an intersection, you know which way is ahead, which is to the left and which is to the right. I'll not loop cut and I'll undo with Ctrl Z until it is done. We are back to squares. This is really neat, so I can add detail in this way. I can loop cut wherever I want and I can extrude regions as well. Be careful, don't just extrude anything. Always make sure you have faces selected in their entirety. So I will do that, really neat. Extrude out, and you see maybe where I'm going with this. I'll select the front face and extrude that as well. It's almost turning into a little character. That brings me to the next bit, because what I do not want to do is I've made his left arm and his left leg. I don't want to make his right arm and right leg by hand as well. We can automate that sort of thing. You don't always have to add all points by hand. Some things we can do automated in Blender. If you look on the right, this is our properties panel. This is the object I'm in. It is still called cube. And if I go to the right 2 more spaces, there is a little wrench symbol. The little wrench is for object modifiers. The modifiers are automated functions that do things to your shapes. I will add a modifier here. For instance, I can add a subdivision surface. This is one that a lot of people use a lot of the time. I will put one there and you can see it adds points to my entire model. By the way, it doesn't matter whether I'm in edit mode or object mode. If you go into edit mode, you can see it doesn't actually add points that I can edit. There are more points here in the gray model, but the actual points I can edit are still just the few I already had. So I can still go here and extrude and it adds extra points, but all this rounding is done for me. I can even make it a little more rounded. You see, this character is coming along really nicely, and we can extrude and still edit, but we don't have to edit as many points as you might expect. So we can edit. I'll change the shape a bit in the meantime. We don't have to finish straight away. That's starting to look kind of like what I had in mind. There we go, that could be an elbow there. So what I mentioned before was I don't really want to edit all this stuff on the other side as well. I've already made his left arm. I would actually like his right arm to look exactly the same as his left arm. And we can also use a modifier for that. First, what I will do is remove everything on this side. What I just did for selecting was drawing a box. So you click on B on your keyboard and then draw a box around what you want to select. Delete those verts. And yes, I just made a hole in my model, which is something I shouldn't be doing. I did it anyway, and now I'll add a mirror modifier. And you see it mirrors my character on the other side straight away. That works really, really well. And if I edit the points on this side, for instance, select all of this stuff, the other side is edited with it automatically. See, we can give him some skinnier hips. Ooh, if I can select, there we go. And that works. Something that I'm thinking about when I do things for 3D printing is I don't really want arms sticking out of the sides of my character. For a lot of 3D printing techniques, like for instance this is a Doris, he has wings sticking out of his side. That can be printed fine in this full color technique. You can see his arms are sticking out of his body as well. This is fine because he's printed in a powder basin that can support the weight of the arms as they're made. If however you want to print on a extrusion type printer like the MakerBot I have, or like an Ultimaker, or there's many different ones, they can't do that. They can't make arms sticking out of the side because they need support underneath them. If I want to print this guy on my own printer, I can't do this. I can't have his arms like this. So what I will do is I want to connect the arm as if he's standing with his hands in his sides, and I'll do that by making a hole here on his hip. I'll actually inset in here. Inset is a very nice function as well, along with extrude and loop cut, but you can't find it in the add menu. Instead, if you know what it's called, I know there's a function called inset. I don't know where to find it. You can hit the spacebar. I'll hit the spacebar. That gives you a search menu, and in here you can find every function in Blender. I will type inset and it tells me the function is called inset faces, and the letter I does it for me automatically. I can click on I on my keyboard, or I can click on it here. I'll click on it here and move my mouse in a bit to inset. I can then select the points around this face and click on X or delete to delete only the face. That cuts a neat hole in my model, and I'll do the same here. I'll select all four, delete the face. Now I've got two holes which I'd like to connect. I'll go look from the bottom so I can align them a bit. I could do this automatically, but I'll do it by hand this once. I select 4 points that I know I want to connect with a square, and then you can hit F on your keyboard, or you can find it here as well. You can under face, make an edge or a face is letter F. So I can select 4 and hit F, and I will do that all the way around here. Makes my character a little bit strange, I think, but it's a good start. Now if this is steep enough, this horizontal, it will still, if it starts printing it, this will drop down on my printer. But if I select all of this and make it steep enough, here we go, I should be able to print it. This maybe not. And we have some really nice new tools in Blender that help you check whether it is steep enough. Right now I'm guesstimating, the checking is for a later tutorial. This is starting to look pretty nice. So we've got a subsurf that we can make more and less detailed, and the left is automatically mirrored on the right. to finish this part, I want to show you just a few little things about these modifiers we've added. One is that you can disable them temporarily really easily. So I can click on the eye and you see the model as it would be without the modifier attached. It's a very neat way to see if you have anything too weird happening. You can just modify it in here. This looks pretty okay, so I go back. Another thing you can do with modifiers is change their order. You will see here in the crotch, for instance, the way that this is subsurfaced changes if I mirror it first. I can click on the little arrow and it's gone lower. It's a lot smoother by mirroring and then subsurfing. I'll do it again. You see it changes. So you can change the order of these. You can click on the little X if you want to remove the modifier. Another really helpful function in the mirror modifier is clipping. That's one that I wanted to show you. It is now disabled. That is the way it is by default. If I select everything and I move it to the right, just click G, move it to the right, you can see there's a big gap between. The two halves aren't actually connected. If, however, I have clipping switched on, I can connect them. I will go to the front. I have this selected. If you want to select an entire loop, by the way, hold down Alt and then click on an edge and it selects an entire loop. I'll go to front view and extrude this out towards the center. And I cannot move this beyond the center now. And once it is connected, I cannot move it away from the center either. Clipping is also very nice. If I want to, for instance, extrude all of this, it will assume or simulate it as if I've also selected on the other side, as if it's all connected. So I can extrude and move all this up a bit. There we go. I have now made this shape. That is pretty nice. If I want to select the edge around it, I can just use Shift and Alt, select like this. A little trick for the subsurf modifier. You can see subsurf modifier makes everything smooth. Sometimes you want a hard edge. To do that, you want to crease it. Creasing is like folding a piece of paper or creasing a piece of cloth. You make a hard edge. You can find all sorts of things to do with edges under Control E. That gives you the edges menu, and in here I want to, in this case, edge crease or Shift E. So I do edge crease, drag it away, and you see we've created a hard edge around this shape here. And if I want to make the entire character a little thinner, that is fine too. You just have to make sure I don't drag it beyond the middle because they all disappear. This is what the clipping does. If I switch it off, I can drag him beyond the middle just fine. So clipping stays on. Just drag him to the middle a bit. Let's give him something to look through. I will just do these two in this case, or just this one, and extrude it in. There we go. So he's got a little bit of an eye slit thing, hole, or a helmet. This is a weird little character. If I wanted to print him, I can go File, Export, and then choose your file format. This guy doesn't have any color. He's very simple, and we would pick STL. That's the most common format for non-colored objects. You can export and get a print, which is what I've done with a guy I made in exactly the same way, though I spent a little bit more time on giving him a more refined shape, and I even made a little friend for him. I will include these models on the DVD so you can have a quick look. It just took about twice as much time as this tutorial took. Before you export, however, have a look at the scaling tutorial because this guy right now would print, I think, at 1 centimeter tall.